Cipriani Downtown is one of the hottest Italian restaurants in New York City. Celebrities are frequently spotted there, and the restaurant can trace its history back to the legendary Harry's Bar in Venice. However, Cipriani has high prices, and I was wondering if it's more of a place to see and be seen rather than serving as a quality restaurant, which was what I wanted to find out.
Today I'm here in New York City, right along the Hudson River, and it is cold, dark, and overcast, but it is always a good day to be in New York City. In fact, I just got back to NYC last week after having had an incredible adventure in Europe, and I can't wait to share some of those experiences in future videos, but for now, I am so happy to be here. For lunch today, I went to a very popular and hyped up Italian restaurant that is quite the hotspot for celebrities. I'm talking about Cipriani Downtown. Now, I've already been to a couple of these old school celebrity Italian hotspots, like Bar Pitti, which I didn't really like much at all, although they did have a good tiramisu at least. I also went to Emilio's Bellato, which I did really like. The food was great, and I loved the atmosphere, but I thought it was very overpriced. I've always been curious about Cipriani. I've walked past their downtown location so many times, and they've got that iconic outdoor sidewalk seating, although not many people are sitting there today because it is quite cold out. At the same time, I've always been a little intimidated about the restaurant. I mean, every time I've walked past it, you see these fancy, rich people eating in front of it, and it kind of gave off a somewhat pretentious vibe. Although having dined there today, my thoughts on the matter have changed. Now, I always like showing up to a restaurant with a reservation, and when I looked at Cipriani's reservations, there were plenty for tables of two, but then when I switched it around for a single diner, there was none. That definitely annoyed me, but I had no problem getting a table as a walk-in, and in fact, many of the customers there today got tables as walk-ins. Having said that, this was my experience at Cipriani Downtown.
Cipriani Downtown is located in SoHo, but there are in fact a number of Ciprianis located throughout New York City with varying names. The SoHo spot is the one that seems to be the most popular and the biggest draw for celebrities. It's been open for a number of years, but the whole Cipriani brand has roots that extend all the way back to 1931 when Giuseppe Cipriani opened Harry's Bar in Venice. Over the decades, Cipriani expanded throughout the world, not just with restaurants, but hotels and clubs. In fact, Cipriani even has a line of packaged food and other products. I was no doubt excited for my lunch, so I arrived to the restaurant a bit after they opened on a Tuesday. Even though I didn't have a reservation, getting a table wasn't a problem. Once I was settled, I took in the space. For the most part, I thought that Cipriani was a nice looking restaurant. I loved the tall ceilings and the lighting of the space. The various works of modern art were interesting and added some good character. However, I wasn't much of a fan of how close the tables were to each other. Now, it wasn't as bad as some New York restaurants, but it wasn't great either. Although, the woman seated next to me was incredibly attractive, so for that lunch, I appreciated the close proximity. In terms of the menu, it proved to be a bit of a surprise since the one the restaurant has online is only a sample menu with no prices. Upon seeing Cipriani's offerings, I had two thoughts. The first, damn, that's expensive, and the second, that's a hell of a lot of stuff. Cipriani features traditional Italian cuisine that was inspired by the original Harry's Bar in Venice. I was definitely curious about a number of the courses, like the 4-pound Branzino al Forno for $230. Yeah, the prices were crazy, but in terms of portion size at least, I do know that for the most part, they're pretty sizable. Next, I explored the beverage offerings. Cipriani is famous for having invented the Bellini, but that day I was more so keen on having wine. As a result, I ordered a glass of Cipriani's own wine, the Cancello del Sol Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, this is a small detail, but I wasn't too fond of the glass it was presented in. I would have more so preferred it to be served in a traditional wine glass. To me, it slightly cheapened what I already figured to likely be $24 overpriced wine. However, the wine was at least better than I thought it would be. Now, it was nothing special, but I did enjoy drinking it. Next, I turned my attention to the bread basket. First, I tried one of the breadsticks, and it was alright. It had a decent flavor and a satisfying crisp. Then I tried some of the bread, which were more like tiny circular forms of crust, but after sampling it, I found it was at least much better than it looked. It seemed fresh and had good flavor. It also paired well with the olive oil I was given, which was Cipriani's own brand. In summation, the bread basket was at least okay, but these days I always appreciate complimentary bread, as it's unfortunately becoming more so a thing of the past. Soon enough, I was presented with my appetizer, which is arguably one of Cipriani's most famous courses, the carpaccio. In fact, carpaccio is an invention at Cipriani, as the creation emerged in 1950 from the original Harry's Bar. The story goes that the Venetian countess and frequent customer of Harry's Bar, Amalia Nani Mocenigo, was placed on a strict diet that involved no cooked meat. As a result, a dish of thinly sliced raw prime beef with a light sauce was prepared for her. The creation would come to be known as carpaccio, which was named after the Venetian painter Vittore Carpaccio. I was eager to give the course a try, not just because it looked good, but because of its history, and I wasn't disappointed. The beef was on the mark. It was tender and filled with flavor. Cipriani utilizes free-range, grass-fed beef tenderloin from Uruguay. The quality of the meat was apparent with each bite, which was lightly seasoned with salt and a bit of a creamy sauce made from mayonnaise, mustard, and Worcestershire sauce. I really liked how Cipriani's carpaccio was prepared. It wasn't topped with a bunch of crap like how some restaurants fashion the dish. Instead, it was simply executed, allowing the beef to truly shine. That was a great start to my lunch, but an expensive one, as that appetizer set me back $38. At least I really enjoyed that course. Next up was my main. I went with the risotto alla primavera, which certainly came in a generous sized portion. After having my plate prepared, I was asked if I would like some grated cheese on top, which of course I said yes to. Now that was a nice looking risotto dish, and I was eager to give it a go. To put it simply, that risotto was lovely. First off, it was perfectly cooked. The rice was the right texture, and all the elements within the creation were on point as well. The creaminess of the course made it go down so easily. The second that I took a bite, I was already thinking about the next. It was addictive. I loved the savory flavor and the pop of freshness from the vegetables of the dish. Overall, I thought that was a delicious risotto course. Now, it was a sizable portion. In fact, many of the courses at Cipriani are fairly large. I thought that the dish was perfect for sharing, especially considering that it's risotto, which I more so prefer to have as an appetizer or side dish, not as a main course. The fact is, I was a bit thrown off earlier when I was presented with such a large menu, and I wasn't certain of what to order for my main. Although, I definitely don't regret selecting the risotto. It was delicious, and it's a specialty of the restaurant. After finishing, it was time for dessert, but before that, one of the servers changed my tablecloth since there was a slight spillage of risotto on it. Most restaurants wouldn't bother doing that for such a small blemish. It didn't bother me, but I thought that it was a nice touch. In terms of desserts, they're fairly basic and expensive. Now, I wasn't going to get it, but I was definitely curious as to what a $50 mixed fruit sorbet looked like. After ordering and before I was presented with my official dessert, I was given 2 buttery shortbread cookies. They were really tasty and proved to be nice little treats. I just loved their rich buttery flavor and delicate texture. It wasn't long until I was presented with my dessert, which was another signature dish of the restaurant, the vanilla meringue cake. Now that was a good looking and impressive slice. It's basically a soft vanilla sponge cake with cream and a fluffy toasted meringue. I couldn't wait to try that slice, and I wasn't disappointed. It was fantastic. While the cake may look large, it actually was very light. The cake and cream were the perfect textures. It was clearly a dish that was freshly made. That slice of cake went down easy, and it proved to be a nice ending to an overall good lunch. I enjoyed all the food that I had, but I must say that I was most impressed with the service and hospitality. The perceptions I had of the restaurant as being pretentious were ill-conceived, as I found Cipriani Downtown to be a warm and welcoming place. Everyone I interacted with at the establishment was extremely nice, and Gagi, the host, was a true professional. The only thing that I didn't like about the restaurant were the prices, and I feel like it is a bit overpriced. Now, it's a popular place in New York City, so of course you sort of expect that it's going to be a bit costly, but in comparison to similar Italian spots in the city, it's still a bit high. In fact, the previous day I went to another expensive NYC Italian restaurant, the Michelin-starred Cipriani. I had 2 great pasta dishes there, but the thing with those courses was that they were unique, which provided more justification for their price. Now, Cipriani does have a number of signature dishes, but at the end of the day, it still felt a bit too costly to me. And speaking of the cost, after finishing, I was given the bill, which totaled to $135, but with my tip, I spent an even $160. Now, that was an expensive lunch, but I still had an enjoyable experience.
So that was a pretty good meal. I really enjoyed myself. Cipriani was actually a lot better than I thought it would be. I was really impressed by the restaurant's service and hospitality. Like I said beforehand, I had these perceptions of Cipriani as a very pretentious place, but really, there was none of that. Now, there were still a lot of fancy, rich people there. Honestly, I felt like I saw more Rolex Submariners there than I would at a Rolex boutique. But at the same time, everyone was treated equally, with the utmost respect, and honestly, you felt like the most important person in the room. Plus, I felt like the great service and hospitality helped ease the pain a bit when it came time to pay the bill, because I still feel like Cipriani is a bit overpriced. However, I feel like Cipriani provides better value than, say, Emilio's Bellato. I mean, take for example that risotto dish I had, $40. That was a hell of a lot of money. But it was a pretty big portion. 2 people could have had that. And I did really enjoy the food. Everything I had was very tasty. Plus, their menu is pretty interesting. I mean, there were a lot of courses on there, and many of which I would like to try. Overall, I had a pretty good experience today at Cipriani. I mean, my bank account didn't, but it was a good meal. In summation, I think Cipriani Downtown is a pretty good place. Now, it wouldn't be the first spot I would recommend for an Italian restaurant, but it's not bad. To sum it up, I had a pretty good lunch today at Cipriani, and I'll definitely be back.